and welcome to the Good Girl Confessional podcast. I'm your host, Sandy Lowres, and the Good Girl Confessional podcast is proudly brought to us by WB40, Women Beyond 40, a platform for women 40, 50, 60 and beyond who want to talk about grown-up stuff. You can join us at WB40.com. Before we begin today's podcast, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which this podcast is recorded, and in that case, it is the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations, and I would like to pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Today in the podcast, our very special guest, I'm a little bit giddy, is Jenny Valentish. She's an absolute rock star. She's a journalist, a writer. She has written a Walkley-nominated book. It is incredible, called Woman of Substances, A Journey into Addiction and Treatment. She has also written another book, which she launched last year, called Everything Harder Than Everyone Else. And it's really a look at people who take their bodies and, to the extremes of exercise and other things. So, Jenny is also a coach and a memoir writing teacher. She is just an extraordinary human. She's been a Muay Thai amateur fighter and is now doing bodybuilding as well. And, I'm super excited for you to join us for this chat. Please welcome to the Confessional, Jenny Valentish.
Hey there. When Sandy's not interviewing kick-ass women, she's hanging out with me at Alex the Seal, a podcast about music and nostalgia. I'm Jo Pybus, and each episode, Sandy and I talk about all the songs that got us hooked up, knocked up, and broken up. Do yourself a favour and search Alex the Seal on your podcast app. Love you, Molly.
Hello and welcome to the Confessional. How are you, Jenny?
I'm great. Thanks for having me, Sandy.
Oh, I'm super excited to have you here, and thank you, because I know you've had a few late nights, so thanks for joining me this morning. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, late nights, just to clarify, just because I've been doing things in a different time zone.
Yes, actually, we should clarify that for sure. The time zones are a bit full on, aren't they? We have so many guests on this podcast that are actually overseas, and so it's kind of a really interesting, and I always try and, make it less painful for them than me. So it's...
Yes, I mean, I'm in Rye on the Mornington Peninsula right now, but so I'm from the UK, so there's 11 hours difference at the moment, which is just crazy.
Yeah, wow, that is crazy. And at least, because I'm a Melbourne girl, the sun is absolutely shining today, which is small miracles. We'll take it when we can. It's nice to see it.
Yeah, I've been for a splosh in the sea already. It was a bit rippy, so being English, I just went up to my knees. But, the intent was there.
Look, I salute you. I can't even believe that you've been in the water this early in the morning, so well done you. I wanted to chat with you. I've got so many questions because you've had this most extraordinary career as a journo and as a writer, and the stuff that you explore is kind of really hardcore. It is brilliant and amazing, and your work resonates with so many people. I know that you've got a new book out, but before I start on that, of course, I really kind of need to have a chat about this book, which is quite extraordinary. So Woman of Substances, A Journey into Addiction and Treatment. It's such a powerful book, and I know it's led to a whole lot of other stuff in your career, which is amazing, including being on the board of, of Smart Recovery, etc. How did the book come about? Because, let's start there. How did this book come about? Because it's pretty extraordinary.
Well, I quit drinking and using drugs for 8 years. So I do drink now, but in a completely different fashion. That's another kind of area to get into. But so this was back in 2009, and I was reading everything I could get my hands on because, like a lot of women, I tend to project manage my way out of a crisis. So sure, I was doing things like I went to AA and outpatient meetings and Smart Recovery and that kind of thing, like everything I could, but also read as much as I could. And addiction memoirs, bless them, tend to be very linear, like it's a redemption tale, essentially. So you have all this exciting first 2/3 of the book where it's like somebody telling you all the stuff they got up to, and you just can't get enough of it, because a lot of time it's blackly funny, isn't it? Even as it's awful. And then suddenly they'll become sober, and the tone completely changes, and it's all kind of recovery speak and 12-step, and it's very much just before and after. Like, before I was sick, and now I'm cured, and life's not like that, you know. If you, whatever you want to call it, recovery, whatever, you know, it's in flux. Our lives are in flux. And so it really irritated me that you'd have this born again kind of narrative in these books. So I wanted to write something more realistic and helpful. Like, we know what addiction looks like, and we know what recovery can look like, but why do people become addicted in the first place? You know, to me, it was like this biopsychosocial soup. So it's not a disease in my mind. It's, you know, the result of a combination of things, like how you grew up, where you grew up, your peers, your family, your situation, whether you are living in poverty, whether you have good structures around you to help you, you know, to give you a leg up, or if you don't. It's down to personality and temperament and, you know, mental health and trauma and all sorts of things. So I really wanted to crack all that stuff open and get really deep into it. So I just used my own story as a case study, which was good as well, because it meant I didn't feel obliged to say absolutely everything. It may seem to people if they read it that I have, but I haven't. I just got to choose things that illustrated each point I was trying to make. So along the way, I interviewed 30 researchers, neuroscientists, clinicians, people working on the front line about, the most up-to-date stuff about what we understand about what addiction is. And I crunched about 300 scientific papers, as in, read them and extracted the findings or contacted the researchers themselves and clarified. And so there's tons of research in there, because I really wanted to utilize my position as a journalist and be able to access these people and talk to them and find out answers selfishly for myself, but then for women in general. And of course, men can extract a lot from this as well. It's just that I'm also looking at how does the situation differ for women, because women are really under-researched in the medical world in general. So that includes, in the field of drugs and alcohol, for all sorts of reasons. Men are the low-hanging fruit because they don't have menstrual cycles getting in the way. They're not going to be pregnant, etc. So there's a real lack of insight into the female experience. So I wanted to look at how women, how their pathways into addictive behaviour might be different to men's, how their experiences while in the throes of it might be different, and how recovery can be different, and maybe where it's lacking. So that was a very long answer to a short question, but it was basically me wanting these answers myself.
I think it's really powerful because of that. I think that, and you're right, it would be really easy to read it and then say, oh, you've given us your entire journey through your, addiction as well. But it's really great that you clarified that, because it's, for everybody, it's so complex. Addiction is so complex, right? And it's so different for everyone, the journey in and out of it. And as you say, it's so complex in the way that people end up really with an addiction. And I really like too that you mentioned things in this book about it's not just drug and alcohol addiction, but it's other addictions that can be quite damaging for women as well. For everyone, but women as well, in terms of, compulsive eating and, whatever it may be, sex, whatever. I think that's the other thing too, that we have this very narrow view of what we think addiction is as well. And we tend to go to the darkest places.
Yeah, and I should really technically call it addictive behaviours. Having done stuff like been on the board of Smart Recovery and been a consultant in the field, it's important to use language that's accurate. So addictive behaviours can, cover more of a scope really than addiction itself can. Yeah. And, I guess it would be great for those who haven't read your work. Everybody should, and we'll put up links so everybody will. But for those that haven't, can you give us a little rundown, I guess, on
how for you that started. Like, how did you, find yourself being addicted to alcohol, to drugs? And I think why I'm asking this question is because I think it's really pertinent right now that there's a lot of women, especially women over the age of 40, 50, who are really having a look at their, addiction, I guess, or their, as you say, addictive behaviours towards alcohol.
Yeah, and it could be a classic age to do that as well, because, there's a whole chapter on this, but when you reach perimenopause or menopause, it can sort of bring back all these old kind of buried emotions. But also, it's a period of transition where perhaps kids have left home, or perhaps you don't have that same career you did, or, maybe a marriage is broken up. And so all these things shake us up and force us to sort of look at things in a deeper way. But so for me, I started drinking very heavily on my own when I was 13 after school. I don't want to get too much into like trauma story because I exhausted myself doing it at the time, but it was because I was depressed and quite lonely, I guess, and didn't really have a great family setup of being able to talk to it. It's just a very English kind of family. And also my dad was a huge drinker, so I had this kind of unedited supply at my fingertips, and I didn't feel like I had to be too careful. As a kid, sometimes you have to be very precise about topping things up with a bit of water or whatever. I didn't really feel like I had to do that. I didn't think it would be missed. So I had everything there at my disposal. And I had the environment where there was going to be a bit of a blind eye turned, or at least they didn't really know what to do with me. So, and then of course that just widened into taking as many different drugs as I could through my teens. And partly it was just fascination and curiosity, like the idea that you could take something and you would change and be someone else. It was very mystifying and also quite appealing. If you're in a state of self-loathing and you can take something and you'll be different, that's so appealing, even if it might make you feel more emotional or more depressed in the long run. It was just to me it was like an Alice in Wonderland kind of scenario where that's just incredible. So I also had this kind of mentality where I always wanted to go harder than my peers. So there was that driving it as well. And so there was this kind of reputation to uphold, I felt, in my teenage years of being the person who'd taken more kinds of drugs than my peers and been known for that. So quite an immature mindset, really, I had for a good few decades of my life. So all these things kind of fed into each other. And then I really, really got into speed in my sort of late teens to, I guess, early to mid 20s, which had, it had a few purposes, really. Like, it makes you feel very chatty, obviously, but very, more connected with your fellow human beings, really, because it releases all the serotonin and stuff in your brain, and you just feel more, closer to people, which I was lacking, really. So these things, they do serve us a purpose at first. And so, and also it meant that I was safer, because I used to drink to the point of being in complete danger, because I wouldn't understand that, you have to be able to get home at the end of an evening. I just wouldn't ever consider that kind of thing. Didn't have that sort of forward thinking, because I was always getting myself into horrible situations. Whereas if you take speed as well, you're not as drunk. So, it was all quite logical to me. But of course, these things, they take a massive toll on your brain and your mood, as well as your body. So eventually everything just started to crash. But I didn't give up alcohol until I was 34. And you get to that age, or, any later age, and you just don't want to roll with the punches anymore. When you're younger, everything's an experience. And even if it's a bad experience, that's still an experience. That's how I looked at it. But as you get older, it just grinds you down.
Hello, Sandy here from the Good Girl Confessional podcast. The Good Girl Confessional podcast is proudly brought to us by WB40, a platform for women 40, 50, 60 and beyond. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you'd like to see the rest of the video, please head over to WB40.com and subscribe to WB40 WB40 Extra. By subscribing to WB40 Extra, you're helping to support the hard-won wisdom of incredible women. So thank you. Please remember to like, share and follow.